All right, good evening. Thank you all so much for coming. Welcome to the Billings Public Library. My name is Hannah. I'm the Assistant Director here at the BPL. It is my honor to have the opportunity to introduce award-winning author Jamie Ford. Mr. Ford's debut novel, Hotel on the Corner of Bitter and Sweet, a story of love and friendship that transcends time and one of the darkest periods of American history, spent 2 years on the New York Times bestselling list. Jamie joins us tonight to discuss his latest work and read with Jenna Today Book Show Club pick, The Many Daughters of Ah Fong Moy. On behalf of the Writer's Voice, this House of Books, and the Billings Public Library, it is my pleasure to introduce Jamie Ford.
Wow. Okay. This is a beautiful crowd. You just gotta indulge me here. Let's see. Everyone smile and wave. Yeah. Facebook. Who's on Facebook? Okay. Who's on Twitter? Who's on Instagram? Who's on TikTok? Who's not on anything? All right, okay. Excellent. How are those 8-track tape collections coming along? That's okay. You will save us from the dark ages. Wow, I'm gonna turn this slightly there. This is so nice. This is so great. One quick question. There is no wrong answer to this, but I'm slightly curious, and it helps me sort of guide this discussion. Who might have read my first book, Hotel on the Corner of Bitter and Sweet? Woo, okay, all right. We do not need to talk about that tonight. No, I'm happy to talk about it. I'm happy to talk about all my books, but... Turn the mic up. Okay, here we go. I don't know if I have the power up here. How am I doing? I think I'm maxed out. Okay, can you hear me in the back?
Yes.
Okay, I may have to... I'm generally kind of soft-spoken, but I just will eat the mic and talk really... Oh, okay, now we're totally doing that. Okay, we're talking loud. Okay, we'll figure out a way to do this. Okay, it's weird because it kind of like makes me feel like I have a Hitler mustache, and that's not the look I was going for. As you can tell, I'm a very serious author. Hotel on the Corner of Bitter and Sweet. That book is still doing its thing, and I still get asked about it, which is fine. But I do have an appreciation for the Eagles when they come on stage and like, we're gonna play this new song, and everyone's like, boo! Hotel California is all we want to hear. Because so many people have read that book, and that book is still just doing its thing, I tend to give the hotel update. And people always want to know, hi there. People do want to know about the film, and there was a musical. Those are still in production. It was optioned for a film. It was optioned for a stage musical. Both of those things got T-boned by COVID, and I got to learn a new French term called force majeure, which means if there's an asteroid collision or an alien invasion or a global pandemic, then they can halt the production indefinitely and rethink things. And so that's kind of what's happened there. The other thing that's happened with Hotel, and I may have mentioned it before, but Hotel is read widely in schools now, which, yeah, I'm homework. It is weird to grow up and become homework. It's a strange thing. And the way I became aware of this was through summer reading. It wasn't like one day no schools are reading that book and the next day 200 schools are reading it. It was a slow creeping thing. And what happened was teachers had read it, liked it, added it to their summer reading, and then eventually it worked its way into the curriculum all over the country. But I first became aware of it through summer reading. And the thing is, I know how summer reading works because I raised a household of teenagers. And the way summer reading works is the last day of school, kids get that summer reading list. It goes in their backpack. They go home. The backpack goes in the corner of the room where it collects dust all summer long. And then 1 week before school is set to begin, they dig it out. and they all go to a website called sparknotes.com. And I'm not there. So there's this collective shriek from 10th graders all over the nation at the tail end of August. And I'm not on sparknotes.com, but I am on the internet. I'm on social media, and they track me down. It's easy for them to find me. And so now it's happening as we speak. I get like 20 emails per day from high school students, like every single day. And they say these beautiful, heartfelt things. You know, they're like, Mr. Ford, I loved your book, Motel on the Corner of Sweet and Sour is my all-time favorite. If you could just answer this question for me. I do not answer their questions, but I usually respond. You know, it's something in kind. Usually it's just like, say hi to your teacher for me and stuff like that. But I did get a message recently through Instagram, and this is from someone who was a high school student assigned to read my book. And this is truly like the greatest email I've ever received in my life. And I'm going to share it with you. Dear Jamie Ford, the book Hotel on the Corner of Bitter and Sweet was a really good book up until page 369. You sick, twisted bitch. I hate you so much. Why? Why, Jay, why? Why you do that? Why you make me cry in the car on the way to ziplining? Why would you do that to all the people that were forced to read this shitty book? At first, I hated this book, but then Keiko and Henry made me almost sort of tolerate this book. But no, you had to put in Ethel, that witch and pathetic, backstabbing heart stealer of how the book was supposed to end. Page 369 broke my heart, like more than when my lizard died. And do you know how much I died when my lizard died? Try almost actually dying. So the only way to make it up to me is to make a sequel and make sure that Henry and Keiko end up together and have awesome Chinese and Japanese babies. P.S. I don't mean to be mean or anything. This is just my opinion. So. I like teenagers because they're honest. I like honesty. I know what to do with that. But I'm here to talk about a new book. Woohoo! I know, good grief. This book, The Many Daughters of Afong Moy. This book came out 3 weeks ago, and wow, it's doing its own thing. It took me a while to get out from under the shadow of the success of my first book, and I feel like I finally did it. And I've created another shadow. So I'm trying to figure out what to do with the book after this, but that's a good problem to have. I just want to share with you some of the things that this book is doing. And this isn't me bragging. There's a reason I'm going to qualify all of this. The book, it was a Today Show pick. So I went on the Today Show. It was chosen by Genevieve Hager. It was a Book of the Month selection for August. It was an Indie Next list. These are all the indie bookstores. They vote on their favorite books, and it was the #1 book for August. I just did an Instagram Live this afternoon with R&B, Grammy-nominated R&B recording artist named Amory, and she has a book club with her 500,000 social media followers, and she chose it for her book club. Sarah Jessica Parker posted about it on Instagram, which is weird. I don't know what you do to celebrate. You buy shoes or something. I'm not sure. Amazon, it was their editor's pick. It was an Apple pick for August. There's a billboard in Times Square in New York City with this book on it, which is crazy. And it debuted on the New York Times bestseller list. The only reason I'm sharing this with you is because my original publisher did not want this book. So I'm working on my memoir called Schadenfreude, My years in the publishing industry. Yeah, it was, my previous 3 books are historical fiction. I wanted to write 3 Seattle books, and they're semi-linked, and that was what I wanted to do. But I didn't realize that by doing that, I was creating a box of expectation. And I had the same editor for my first 2 books, and then she became an agent, and I had a different editor for my last book. And I'm happy with the book. I wasn't thrilled with the experience. And that was validated by the fact that when I wrote about half this book and I sent it to her, she was just like, this is not gonna work. No one wants to read this. I'm not bitter, I'm not small about this. But it was scary because you have to make a decision of like, okay, do I just cave in and, this is what I really want, and just chuck this and put myself back in the box they want me to be in and do dance monkey dance in the box? Or do I walk away from a book contract and just try something else? And that's what I did. It was not an easy decision. It was the first time in my career, first time in 12 years that I did not have an editor, I did not have a book contract, I did not have a publisher. It was starting over again. And I went out and we went on submission, and let me turn this down just a little bit, and we ended up, can you hear me okay in the back? Okay, there's just kind of like a little weird echo. I ended up leaving my publisher, Random House, and I ended up with Simon & Schuster. And I was very happy. I have a wonderful editor there. I have a wonderful home for me and my imaginary friends. And no kidding, the day I was signing my contract with Simon & Schuster, it was announced that Random House is buying Simon & Schuster. Just pulling me back in. So things might get a little awkward, but we'll see how that goes. The one thing I want to talk about with this book is, and there's lots of things I like to talk about, but people really want to know about the Today Show thing. People want to know, how does that happen? Like, how do you get chosen? And it was interesting to me, so I'm just going to share a little bit of the mechanics of that. And the way I found out was indirectly. And I was doing a Zoom with a library in Kentucky. And I do Zooms with schools and libraries all the time. And it was just a normal Zoom. It's me, a librarian, about 40 patrons. We're talking books and doing our thing. I get off the Zoom and my phone rings. And I pick it up. It's my publicist. And she says, okay, we didn't want to tell you because we were afraid it was going to freak you out. But there were people from the Today Show on that Zoom watching you. I'm like, who? And she said, all of them. That was her answer. There were 9 people from the Today Show watching me, which is very, it's flattering and it's exciting. It's also makes you very paranoid. I'm like, okay, I order a pizza that night and I get the pizza and from the Domino's delivery guy, and I look at my phone expecting it to ring, and it's like, okay, that was not the pizza delivery person. That was a producer from the Today Show. They wanted to know if you put pineapple on your pizza. I felt like I was being scrutinized from afar, which I kind of was. And I became hyper aware of my social media, like, oh, what if I say this, they're either gonna like it, not like it, find it funny, find it distressing, whatever. But evidently I passed muster with that call, which got me a call with 3 producers. And it was fine, it was pleasant, it was social. They're asking me questions, but their questions their questions were just kind of bubblegum questions. They just wanted to see me and basically make sure they could put me on morning television. They wanted to make sure I was socially housebroken, you know? That's all they wanted to know, because they live in fear of that, I'm sure, that because authors can be all over the map as far as our social skills, myself included. And they just wanted to make sure I'm not going to walk out there on the Today Show and be like, turn into Alex Jones or something like that. Like, all right, I'm here to talk about interdimensional sex vampires or something like that. They just wanted to know I was going to be okay. And I got past that, and then I had another one. And this is when, okay, he's not QAnon crazy. He's not going to go, off in some strange tangent. And then I had more producers. It's like 5 producers. And then they're asking questions. They want to know, they're trying to kind of put together my story. They're journalists. They want to put my story on the screen. And they're asking about my childhood. They're asking about my parents. They're asking about my kids. And they're just looking for like an angle. And they just really want to get to know me. And after a bunch of, fairly pleasant yet benign questions, I just said, okay, I will sum up everything you need to know about me in one sentence. And I said, when I was in the 4th grade, my parents sent me to poetry camp. And they're like, cool, we know who this guy is. All right, got it. Done, we're done here. Like, okay, let's see. He collected comic books, yep, okay. Played Dungeons and Dragons, yep. Had a girlfriend in high school, imaginary, yep. Like, that was me in a nutshell. And then I did get finally like an hour-long Zoom with Jenna, and we just talked about books. It was nice. It was pleasant. It was just like, and we barely talked about this. We talked about a bunch of other books that we both liked, and it was just great to talk to someone who's on television who really is just a bookie at heart. It was clear. I mean, we talked deep about a bunch of different books. You can't fake that. So, and then ultimately, you go and this is the only time I felt kind of like a rock star. So they picked me up at the hotel in a car, and they drove me 3 blocks. I was like, it was awesome. Like, my diva moment. But they take you to this unmarked door that's in the building of Rockefeller Center, and there's just like a keypad, and then it opens up, and there's like an NBC person. They whisk you inside and take you to the green room. But even then, they've done all this vetting, but I'm still just, I'm tempted just to go off script. There's no script, but you know what I mean. I was in the green room with my publicist, who's wonderful, and she puts up with lots of crazy authors, and she's there, and it's the first time she's had an author on the Today Show, so it's the first time that she's been in that green room as well, and Sheryl Crow is in the other green room, and we're just doing our thing, and she's like, "Do you know what you're gonna say?" And does anyone remember? There was a telethon for hurricane relief. I think it was Hurricane Katrina, and it was Mike Myers and Kanye West. And Mike Myers is like, yeah, your funds will go to flood relief for people in need who've lost their homes. And they cut to Kanye, and he goes, George Bush hates black people. He just stares at the camera. So I turned to my publicist, and she's like, do you know what you're gonna say? And I said, I'm going Kanye. And she just looked at me with like her lip quivering. She's like, please don't. So I did not. I just went on and did my thing. But it was about this book, this new book, The Many Daughters Afang Moy. It's about inherited trauma. And that sounds really heavy, in trauma and PTSDs and stuff of that nature is heavy. But the book is also about other things that we might inherit. So I call it my epigenetic love story. And what's epigenetics? The long-term phrase is transgenerational epigenetic inheritance. When you think of genetics, we think of inheriting eye color, hair color, things, physical traits. And epigenetics explores the very real possibility that we inherit psychological traits like phobias and resiliency and emotional IQs, levels of empathy, and in many cases, our ability or inability to interact with other people, to love other people. And so what I've done with this book is I started with a central character named Afong Moy. She was the first Chinese woman to come to America, a real woman. Came to this country in 1834, and she created a sensation. She was written up in 200 plus newspapers. She traveled up and down the eastern seaboard from New England all the way down to Cuba. And she would perform on stage. People would pay money to see her. And she would sing in Chinese, she would demonstrate chopsticks, and she had bound feet, which was really what people wanted to see. It was this kind of the sideshow attraction of her existence. And I was fascinated by this person. She was, there were poems written about her, songs written about her. There were racing horses named after her. She was famous, and it's very strange. Today we live in an attention economy where people want to be internet famous, they want to be TikTok famous, they want to be a YouTube influencer. She was famous. For a moment there, she was probably the most famous woman in America, but she had zero autonomy over her own life. And she's never quoted in the newspaper. She's always, her whole life is through the voice of the people who are promoting her, who have monetized her. And so all of this excitement, it kind of turns a blind eye to the fact that Chinese women couldn't leave China at that time. And if they did, the punishment was death. So she wasn't here as a Nellie Bly-like world traveler. She wasn't here as a cultural ambassador. She was most likely sold into this service. And the last anyone hears about Afong Moy is in 1849. There's a mention in a newspaper that someone realizes that she's living in a poorhouse in New Jersey. And she had bound feet, so her capabilities were limited, and it's very likely that her story ended in tragedy, ended in, she never went home. She was essentially sold, she was abandoned. She had, I just try to think of the loss and the disconnection you must have. It's like being sent to Mars and you just never come home and you never really assimilate. And I wanted to write about her, but I couldn't find a redemptive ending to her story. And it wasn't until I went down the rabbit hole of epigenetics, and then I realized I could give her descendants, and her descendants could have a voice. She could have a voice through her descendants. Her descendants could redeem her and give her a legacy instead of just a tragic dead end to her story. And the way epigenetics really resonated with me was through my son Taylor. He's now in Chicago. He's a musician. But when he was 12, he came up to me and he said, "Dad, have you heard of this band called Van Halen?" And I'm like, yeah. At the time, I had never played Van Halen for him. We listened to a lot of Radio Disney and things like that. And I was like, yeah, where did you hear of Van Halen? And he discovered them on YouTube. And I'm thinking, okay, Van Halen has a lot of videos with chicks in bikinis. Like, it wasn't that. He had just found their music and their performances live. And he had just decided they were the greatest band ever. And I thought that was really peculiar because my first concert ever was Van Halen. It was weird. And it was one of those, like, it could be a parent-child coincidence, right? But he inherited my hairline and my overbite. Why not my dubious taste in hair metal, it was so strange, but I did begin to reflect on what else we inherit. And the book really is an exploration of that. And the main character is actually a woman named Dorothy Moy, and she is a descendant of Afong. It follows 6 generations, and Dorothy is living in Seattle in 2045. So it's a little bit into the future. It's not rocket ships to Mars. It's not, robots walking around. It's just a little bit into the future, and some things are slightly different. And it's much of that is what really freaked out my former publisher. They didn't want me, straying off this map of expectation they had for me. In between, there's all these other generations. There's Fei Moy, who is a Chinese nurse working with the Flying Tigers in China during World War II. There is Zoe Moy, who is a Chinese student at a very bohemian school in England in the 20s called Summerhill. Oh, some people are familiar with Summerhill. Right, my people are here. Summerhill, that's a whole other, should write a whole book about Summerhill. There is Greta Moy, who is a contemporary character, and she's living in Seattle in 2014, and she has created a feminist dating platform. And there's also a character named Lai King Moy, and she is living in San Francisco in the late 1800s when San Francisco had a plague epidemic. It was a true story. They had a plague epidemic. And so it's very weird to be writing about a plague epidemic during a global pandemic. And this doesn't appear in the book, but it's what I learned from the research that I did. When San Francisco had this plague epidemic, there was a politician, the governor of California, Henry Gage, did not want to acknowledge that this was happening because he feared it would hurt California's economy and it would hurt his chance of re-election. There was a doctor. There was a doctor with a vaccine. The doctor and the politician had a war of words in the press, with the politician calling the doctor a quack. He is monetizing. He has a profit motive. He's trying to scare people. And some people wanted the shot. Some people didn't want the shot. Does that sound at all familiar? It was so disheartening to write about this, and it's happening. I mean, that was 120 years ago, and we just repeated the cycle. And in San Francisco, they blamed the Chinese. The Chinese were the ones who brought this disease upon us, much like COVID. I don't know where this comes from, but it's baked into our DNA, and we need to unbake it somehow. So anyway, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to read a few pages, and then we'll talk. I don't normally read much. If anyone's ever seen me before, I read like a half a page, and that's it. And there's many reasons why I keep my reading short. My favorite reason is I did an event in Florida, and I was about to read, and this woman with cotton hair stands up in the back, and she yells, "We already know how to read!" And that's awesome when that happens. I was actually really charmed by her. I was. Afterwards, I gave her a big hug, and it made me realize that every one of us, myself included, if we are so fortunate, we will arrive at a ripe old age where we can say whatever we want under any social circumstance. And I look forward to that day. So I'm going to read a little bit more than I normally do, just because. And it's about 5 pages, so bear with me. The book begins with Fei Moy, and Fei is a nurse in China during World War II. Let me turn my phone off for a second. That's me. Okay. It's Jenna. No, I'm just kidding. Stop bugging me. No, I won't come to your dad's ranch. I actually do have a lovely Jenna story. She's the real deal. I like her a lot. Okay. Faye, 1942. Faye Moy signed a contract stating that she would never marry. That's what the American Volunteer Group had required of all female recruits, though as she sat in the bar of the Kunming Tennis Club, Faye thought that perhaps there should have been an exception made for older nurses. Not that she had any immediate prospects among the 30 young officers who made up the Flying Tigers. It was just that a notarized statement of marital exclusion seemed to hammer home the fact that she'd never been in love. She'd come close once, back in her village near Canton, amid the wilted lilies of her youth. Since then, she'd felt many things for many people, but always more yearning than devotion, more appreciation than passion. There had even been an awkwardly arranged marriage proposal a lifetime ago at the Toto Koi restaurant, where a dashing young man got down on one knee with a ring and too much pomade in his hair. Wasted, that's what her father said when she turned him down. Fei Jin, why do you have to be this way? No one likes a stubborn girl. She tried not to roll her eyes. Why can't you call me Fei like everyone else? Because I'm not like everyone else. Look at you. You're not getting any younger. You should be happy someone still wants you at your age. She'd been 27. But as much as Fei had wanted to share her life with someone, to watch the sunset in the arms of somebody who wouldn't leave before sunrise, even then she knew that want was not the same as need. She refused to settle for convenience or to abet her aching loneliness. She went to Lingnan University instead. She told herself that if she stopped looking, eventually the right person would come along, but that was decades ago. Now she felt like the jigsaw puzzle of her life had long been completed. The picture looked whole, but there was one piece missing. That's my heart, Faye thought, something extra, unnecessary. Now well into her 50s, Faye still couldn't forget how in nursing school, Chinese mothers used to point at her as she walked down the street in the evening. They'd turn to their daughters and say, "Don't be disobedient or you'll end up like her," or "That's what happens when you're too proud, too foolish. No one wants you." Faye would pretend she didn't hear, then she'd run home and curl up in bed, crying herself to sleep. In the morning, she'd light a Chesterfield and stare at the tobacco-stained ceiling, aching inside as tendrils of smoke drifted upward like unanswered prayers. To her parents and those mothers on the street, Faye was Meifan Noisy, though she didn't feel like an old maid, even after she arrived in Kunming, where she was twice the age of the American nurses who followed. On the bustling streets of Kunming, Faye was treated differently, perhaps because she'd served longer and now hardly noticed the suffocating humidity of typhoon season, or because she didn't scream when field rats crawled their way into her dresser and chewed the buttons off her clothing. Conceivably, it was because she was fluent in English, thanks to Lai King, her American-born mother, and could quote poetry by Li Bai as well as Gertrude Stein, yet also spend an entire afternoon playing canasta and whist while drinking tiger balms and not let the rum cocktails make her sick for days. "You want another?" Faye shook her glass tumbler. Lois, the latest nursing recruit, a comely blonde from Topeka, looked back bleary-eyed. "Am I supposed to say yes? What is this, some kind of initiation? I don't know why everyone around here drinks so much," she said, waving broadly at everyone in the club. "And why do they have to play such sad music?" Faye listened to the jukebox as Frank Sinatra sang "I'll Never Smile Again." She thought about the flashes of light on the horizon each night, the peals of thunder, followed by the rumble of pony carts on cobbled streets in the morning, and the wailing of widows as refugees flooded through the city's arched gates. "It comes with the territory," Faye said as she worried about her parents, whom she hadn't heard from in 2 years. She finished her drink, leaving only a mint leaf. "The mountains will protect us," Faye had been told when she first arrived, even after Shanghai, Nanking, and Hankou fell. Then word spread that the defenses around Chongqing had collapsed and the wind began carrying the malodorous smell she'd learned to recognize as the fetor of burning bodies. Japanese bombers killed thousands of civilians in last week's raids, along with 6 American pilots. President Roosevelt, who had sent planes and men, publicly denied the U.S. involvement in the war between China and Japan, but after Pearl Harbor, there was no need for the pretense, and now everyone in Kunming knew who the Americans were. "I can't believe they made all the nurses swear we'd never marry," Lois said as an aviator walked by with eyes like Gary Cooper. Faye shook her head, grumbling. They should have made the men swear an oath as well. Faye felt invisible compared to Lois, who was so young and fetching in her periwinkle blouse. Why would they want that? It would lessen our chances, Lois said. But I guess at your age, you could probably care less that the AVG is run like a 7th grade church dance. After all, you must be close to retirement. Faye cringed and sighed. She wished she'd cut Lois off 2 drinks ago. But for the rest of us girls, we're still in the game, Lois yammered. You're so lucky. I always wondered what it'd be like to live alone, to be able to choose how to spend my nights and my days. I thought you had a boyfriend back home in Kansas, Faye asked. Oh, please, don't mother hen me, Lois laughed. We could all die over here at any moment, from bombs or malaria or sheer boredom. Faye understood that all too well. Orders arrived like the tropical rains along the Burma Road, all at once or not at all. And when the downpour of wounded came, the nurses gave up wearing white shoes because they were standing in so much blood. Those long days were followed by an idle stew of melancholy, lassitude, and homesickness. Lois kept talking. If I'd wanted to settle down, I wouldn't have traveled halfway around the world to take this job. It's not paradise, but it's more exciting than watching the tumbleweed races back home. Besides, you only get one life, you know? Faye remembered feeling just as eager years ago, restless and weary of her parents' disappointment. She left her hospital job and sailed from Canton to Rangoon aboard the Jägersfontein, an ocean liner with a swimming pool and an orchestra. And that's where she met and was hired by Dr. Gentry, a U.S. Army flight surgeon who was traveling with a group of pilots and aircraft mechanics, all of them with fake IDs in case they were stopped by the Japanese. Faye had been excited, but also nervous to join the Americans, especially when she heard the Japanese had issued an order to kill all Chinese doctors and nurses caught fleeing the occupied cities. Once she stepped off the ship, however, she felt at ease, as though the broken compass of her heart was now working. She traveled with Dr. Gentry's team on the Burma Road over the Himalayas to Yunnan province. There her magnetic north led her on muddy roads, past water buffalo and roadside statues of the Buddha, towards something unknown but oddly hopeful. Here in Kunming she felt complete, even as the world around her was on fire. I thought you were going to buy me a drink, Lois said. Faye cocked her head, eyes toward the ceiling. Fine, Lois said. I'll go get one myself. Maybe one of these handsome young fellows will come to my rescue. Wait! Faye grabbed Lois's arm. Do you hear that? I don't hear a thing. Faye watched as the bartender quickly unplugged the jukebox, which elicited a round of groans and complaints from drunken patrons. Their protests diminished, however, as one by one they heard the sound of a distant air raid siren. Oh God, not again! Lois knelt down, nearly tipping the table over in the process. As pilots and crewmen began running for the door, Faye listened for the sound of explosions or the heavy thud of passive bombs filled with yellow wax and maggots designed to spread cholera. Instead, she heard the wail change to a long, blaring tone. Let's go, Faye urged Lois, pulling her up and toward the exit. That's the all clear. It means we're safe, but a plane is inbound. Outside the club and into the street, villagers and merchants, beggars and monks all searched the late afternoon sky. Faye looked up as well, hearing the all-too-familiar roar and sputter of a damaged P-40 engine, one of theirs. Then a shark-nosed fighter plane sailed overhead, leaving a contrail of black oil smoke in its wake. The underbelly was painted sky blue with white stars, the colors of nationalist China, but Faye knew the man trying to land the burning plane would be an American. She sprinted in the direction of the new airstrip, a large clearing of land that used to be a sugarcane field, which sat beneath a slope of rolling hills covered in acacia trees. Lois stumbled behind, pausing and muttering as she removed her high heels. As Faye ran, she didn't feel her age or the alcohol she felt needed. And when she arrived at the edge of the airstrip, out of breath, the smoking plane had swung around, dropped its landing gear, and was rapidly descending on an open runway. Lois caught up and swayed next to her as a crowd of mechanics and pilots gathered, some praying, some cursing. Faye had seen this before, damaged planes making emergency landings anywhere they could, clipping treetops or crashing into nearby hangars. The last airman to attempt an emergency landing at Kunming died for his efforts. Faye took Lois's hand as the pilot shut the engine off on descent. It's going to be okay, Lois said, or Faye told Lois. Her words felt like a wish as the nose of the aircraft pitched upward to slow its silent approach. She watched the smoking plane glide above the ground for a breathless moment before its landing gear kissed the surface of the runway. The men around her erupted into cheers. The plane was still smoking, and the front of the fuselage was black with soot, the cockpit a web of broken glass. There were so many bullet holes, Faye wondered how the pilot had managed to survive, let alone land. When he threw back the canopy, she saw his face, covered in blood. The young pilot climbed out, his flight suit slick with oil and his wet boots squished on the runway as he limped toward them. Fail-Fate, the crowd surged forward. She became a rock in a stream of people flowing past her, everyone laughing, cheering, until the cockpit burst into flames. The plane exploded, sending a billowing cloud of debris into the air that made a tinkling sound as hot metal rained down around them. The wounded pilot looked dazed. He looked at her, even as 30 and 50 caliber rounds from the plane's mounted guns began cooking off in the flames, shooting in all directions. The crowd dispersed in a frenzy, shouting, ducking, running. Faye heard the chirping sound of bullets piercing the air. She froze as the young man waved at her amid the mayhem, staggering in her direction. Faye could see his bloody, oil-soaked flight suit, the flammable grime that blackened his hands. She could smell the petroleum as he approached and could feel the heat of the burning wreckage. She watched in horror as the pilot tucked a crumpled cigarette into the corner of his mouth and fished out a Zippo lighter. Faye dashed toward the wounded stranger as Lois called her name, as men screamed, "Get down!" She heard the pilot striking his lighter again and again and again until a curl of fire flickered on the breeze, a wagging finger, orange and blue. I'll stop right there. Thank you. It's a good place to stop, I think. The gist is that Faye meets this pilot for the first time, but somehow they've met before. And that's all I'm going to say about that. And with that, I'd be delighted to answer any questions you might have about this book, previous books, really anything. Yes, please.
I was lucky to get that book from the library. Maybe I had suggested it, and so I got like first pick on it, so I've already read it. Why did you do only women instead of inherited to any voice?
Why did I do only women instead of men's voices? Men of every generation, including August 31st, 2020, always have it easier. And I always feel like the story belongs to the characters with the more interesting problems. And women of every age have always had more interesting problems. An example of this is the narrative in the 20s in England at Summerhill. There's a discussion of women in England winning the right to vote. It's Jenna Bush again. Tell her I'm busy. The suffragettes in England, famous for their hunger strikes, they were force-fed. They did incredible things to win the right to vote. But when they won the right to vote, they had to be at least 30 years old and married. That's not really winning the right to vote. That's a hideous compromise. And so for all of my timelines, I start with Afong, and she's a real character, and I wanted to give her descendants. I wanted to give her daughters, if you will, instead of sons. Guys have it easy. I'm a guy. I know this for a fact. I'm not surprising any of the women here. It's just true. I had a friend who was trying to figure out as a woman what it's like for a man to be kicked in the nuts. And after she did a Twitter poll and she asked lots of feedback, and she's like, oh, so that momentary pain is like what it's a fraction of what's like to be in labor for like 18 hours. Like, oh, boo-hoo, you know, like, I mean, it's kind of true. And so it's just out of respect for that reason. Yes, please.
There are some nurses here like myself that are gonna love this.
Ooh, all right. Thank you. Yeah, there's a nurse in here. There's a nurse in my own life. It's oddly enough, my grandma was a nurse, my aunt was a nurse, I married a nurse, our daughter's a nurse. Can't get away. So they're everywhere. Thank you. Yes, please.
So I was able to read the book. I thought you did a really good job of capturing women. You know, and I wondered what it was like writing. You know, all the characters of women.
Could you hear that question in the back? What she asked was, "Wow, you're handsome. How did you get so handsome? Why'd you do it, God?" No, I'm sorry. That's terrible. That's terrible. No, the question was about what was it like to write female characters and to get into that headspace. The truth is, I've always lived my entire life in that headspace. It's weird because I've always been. It kind of goes back to poetry camp. I was a very sensitive young lad. I was that boy that cried at sad movies and sad books and sad Burger King commercials, you know? And when you're that boy in high school who's very sensitive and very empathetic and more interested in lit classes than metal shop, you know, that sensitivity is not an asset in high school. High school is about how much, for a guy, how much can you bench press and how far can you throw a football? And so all the things that I thought were my weaknesses as a child became my superpowers as an adult. But it even goes back to my friends in high school made fun of me because I took classes that I didn't know were classes that generally only young women took. I wasn't into wood shop or metal shop or auto shop, and as soon as I was done with PE, I was done with PE. I didn't take weightlifting, advanced weightlifting, you know, all that. There were some guys that their senior year was nothing but PE classes, and I'm just like, that was not me. I took all the lit classes I could handle, and then my other electives that weren't lit classes, I didn't quite know what I was signing up for. I just looked at what the class description was, and it was interesting to me. So I took practical family living, which is the class where you have you take a baby and you carry a baby around with you. So there was literally, it was like 28 young women, me and the one queer boy in my class, and that was it. And my friends are like, "Oh, you take that to be with the babes." I'm like, "No, I kind of like this class. This is of interest to me." My mom, played a huge role in my upbringing. I raised 4 daughters. It's kind of who I am. My second book, Songs of Willow Frost, has a woman's point of view, and that was the book that really I became known as the male writer who writes women well, I guess. I don't say that. People say that to me. I would walk into interviews, and they're like, "You're a man," and I'm like, "Yes." I have a Y chromosome, I admit it. And then this one, I've had a lot of questions. Almost at every event, there's usually some woman that will say like, "Dorothy, how did you write her? Like, were you in my head walking around?" And that makes me feel really good. It makes me feel like anytime you can write, you kind of sort of step out of your lane and write, whether that's writing about the future, or writing about elves, or writing about children, or writing about the elderly. I feel like you've achieved a nice feat of empathy by doing that, and so it was good. That was it's kind of naturally how I write. I don't write books with asteroid collisions and gun battles. I write books about the human heart in conflict with itself. And that's what I've always been interested in. Yes, please.
I saw you on the Today Show, and I was like, he's
coming to our library. They asked you who your favorite character was, but I also want to know which person did you enjoy writing the most about, or was it all equal? Was there someone you got into?
My favorite character was Greta, which I think for readers, I did a little Instagram poll, and it is character's least favorite, or reader's least favorite character. Not that she's a horrible character, but she's a contemporary character, so there's less to learn historically. For me, it was just wonderful as a writer of historical fiction to write something set approximately today, because I know what Seattle looks like now, and I don't have to research what Seattle looked like 100 years ago. So it was just a pleasure. And also, the character of Greta is she's a programmer, and I think I might have I did 2 interviews. There's like a short interview, and then there's like a 40-minute interview that was disseminated online. And I think in the longer interview, I talked about how when I was 13, I went to community college, 13 and 14, to take computer programming. And I walked into this computer class as a 13-year-old, and I thought everyone in the computer lab was 90 years old. They were probably 28, and I was super intimidated, and I wanted to, create video games, and I was writing a program to track hotel occupancy. And I was like, this is not for me, and I dropped out. So I became the rare 13-year-old college dropout. But I've always struggled to fit in. Being biracial, I struggled to fit in. Being an oddball kid in high school, I struggled to fit in. Not that I didn't have friends. I had plenty of friends, but I just, it was, I was with the theater kids and the band kids, and the other kids that had struggles, manifest struggles. And so I related to Greta a lot. That's why, Thank you. Yes, please, right there.
I'm always intrigued by the amount of research that goes into writing, so could you talk a little bit about research?
Yeah. Research, questions about research. I love it. I get to read nonfiction books and watch interviews and interview people and pretend I'm working. It's nice. Sit in my office with my feet on my desk and I'm reading and I'm taking notes. I get to indulge in all of my curiosities about a bunch of different subjects. And sometimes a story will come and other times be like, that's really cool. And now I'll know that if I ever go on Jeopardy, and that's not gonna be a book. But it's just, it's just continued learning and for a purpose. For each of these characters, they have a time period and there's sort of a plot arc that I need to research. And the normal things, I research online. I read, tons of very dry academic nonfiction books. I interview people. For this book, there's a lot of karma in this book, and for this book, I interviewed a couple different Buddhist priests from different flavors of Buddhism, if you will, and that was just so interesting. And it's just being able to do that just feels really indulgent and fun. I did have to, the book deals with epigenetics, and there's not a pleasant book to read about epigenetics. There's tons of papers that I read, which are not written for pleasure reading. They're written for peer review, and they are as dry as the Sahara Desert. And I read tons of them, but it was interesting you just have to drink a little extra coffee to get through it. Yeah, way in the back.
I'm glad you brought up being biracial. So with that, how did you decide to go to your Chinese side versus the European side? Was it more because there's more written about European descendants and that history? But China is so interesting. And how did you really deal with that growing up?
Yeah, how did I deal with that growing up? Growing up, I grew up in a typical, almost a stereotypical Chinese American household. My dad was a cook in a Chinese restaurant. We ran a restaurant for a number of years. My dad taught martial arts. If you go to like a mom and pop restaurant, and it can be a Greek restaurant or a Mexican restaurant or a Chinese restaurant, and you see, what appears to be like almost like a first generation immigrant family, and there's little kids running around or sitting at a booth doing their homework. That was me, even though my dad had been was born here. I think writers, I say this often, I think writers write about what they lament. They write about what they miss. And when I moved away from Seattle, I moved away from my Chinese family. I moved away from the international district. I moved away from the restaurants and the culture that I grew up with. And I just missed it. And I understood it as a kid, but I didn't understand it. I didn't appreciate it until I was a grown up. And then I look back and go, oh, that was different, and that was unique, and that was special. And that's why my grandma's stories were a bit more unique than my Caucasian grandma's stories. Even though she grew up in the Ozarks, she has a whole set of other unique stories. Yeah, I mean, like my Caucasian Grandma Blackwell, she grew up in a little town in the Ozarks. She cussed like a sailor and chewed tobacco. I mean, she was a whole other culture. But this one was more of what I missed, and I couldn't find elsewhere. And so that became kind of the place that I wanted to go to in my imagination. Yeah, please.
I've heard you live in Montana. So can you tell us a little bit about how long you've lived in Montana, where you live, and what you like to do here?
Oh, yeah, I live in Montana. I've lived in Montana since '99, so like 22 years. I've been here a while. I know people are like, "You're not a real Montanan." I'm like, I've given 45 pints of blood. I've voted in every election, and I bought 2 homes. Come at me. Like I've shot a deer. I've shot a pheasant. I've camped in negative 40-degree weather. Anyone else here camped in negative 40-degree weather? Right? That's being a Montanan. That's being an Alaskan. That's being an Icelandic human. No, I don't know. People are like, I understand cultural pride and being proud of where you're from. And people are like, I'm a 6th-generation Montanan. And then I meet a Native American. He's like, I'm a 1200th generation Montanan. So it's all relative. We're just gonna be gentle with each other. No, I love Montana. Montana is, it's been a great home for me. It's a great home for my family. It's a great place to raise my kids. It's where all the things I want to do when I'm not writing are here, whether that's things in the winter or the summer or on a river. Yeah, it's just the quality of life is really hard to beat, I think. It's not for everybody. My editorial team in New York City, they're just different. They're like, I tell them like, oh, I went hiking in Glacier or hiked to the top of Rocky Peak on the Rocky Mountain front. It's a significant hike and a scramble. And they're like, oh, I went hiking too. We sort of walked around Central Park. And I'm like, let me show you a photo. And it just blows their mind that these places exist and that people live here. I did, I flew into Portland one time, and sometimes they'll have a media escort pick you up. It's usually like a retired librarian or bookseller, knows the market. They'll pick up the author and drive you around to all your things you need to do. And a woman picked me up, and she had grown up in Portland, and she said, why do you live in Montana? And I was like, there's a nicer way to ask that. I'm very happy to make my home here in Montana. Although when I did have success with my first book, and people are like, I go to the grocery store, people are like, you're still here. I'm like I'm supposed to move to Brooklyn or something? Like Jonathan Franzen just rolls up in a minivan, like, get in, you're going to Brooklyn. I wouldn't live in Brooklyn at gunpoint, so I'm very happy here. Yeah.
When you were here before at this House of Books, I think you talked about a book club.
Hmm.
Are you still in that book club?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm in a book club. The question was about a book club. I'm in a guys book club. I've been in a guys book club for 10 years now. It's called Books and Brews. We rate books on a scale of 1 to 6 beers. The only 2 books that have had a perfect 6-pack were Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy and Fun Home by Alison Bechdel. 2 wildly different books. But no, they're great. I actually wrote an essay which hopefully will be published by the Today Show on being in a guys book club. They were fascinated by that. They're like, we want to come to Montana and do a feature on your book club. And I was like, that'd be kind of cool. Yeah, I get it. Book clubs are amazing. There are approximately 5 million people in America in a book club, and we are probably there's 10 of us. I don't know how many other guys book clubs there are. There's not many, but I get it. They're great. Sorry, I could just go off on that forever, but book clubs are really special, and I thoroughly enjoy it. It's like I was on tour this month and missed my book club meeting with the guys, and so I'm kind of sad. But what are we reading? They just read The Color Purple by Alice Walker. Trying to think what we read the previous month. We just read so many books, I forget them. I'm like, what was that? Yeah, I think we read something by Willa Cather before that, and Jim Harrison before that. Yes, please.
Do you have a publicist that would handle your social media, or are you solely responsible, maybe before the book, for your own stuff there?
Do I have someone doing my social media? Yeah, it's me. For better or worse. Oh.
So I wondered, like, oh, he's a famous author. Maybe somebody's helping.
Yeah, I'm not that famous to have someone do my social media. I mean, even then, I wouldn't want them to, because I think authors' words are important to us. If you are not known for words, so if you are Tom Cruise isn't known for his long-form essays or anything like that. He can have someone do a social media, because whatever they say, he doesn't care. But I care what those words are, even if they're silly or angry or weird. I find it's a funny question, because I do know more than a handful of authors that have personal assistants who are actually them with a different email. And I mean, there's an author, she's a dear friend, Hillary Jordan. She has a personal assistant named Alexander, who is Hillary. It's just a different email. And so when she gets requests and she has to, like, turn someone down or something, or Alexander replies to all of those. Like, Hillary got your email and sure appreciates it, and she's just too busy right now, that kind of stuff.